Well, good morning and welcome to Budget Model Railways and another Train Shed Tuesday. It's been a couple of weeks, my apologies. My wife and I had a little bit of time away the other week because the build is getting a bit fraught. We're getting towards the finishing stages, and the other week because we were busy doing the build and still are. And also because I've been quite busy with this layout. So I've actually done a couple of videos on this layout instead of Train Shed Tuesday ones, and I'm going to talk about a bit about this today, but please go back and have a look at the other videos. And that's a theme I'm going to sort of pick up on. Is quite often I get people that say to me, why don't you do a video of this, and why don't you do a video on that? And 9 times out of 10 I already have. It's worth bearing in mind we've several hundred videos, so it's worth going back through and having a look and seeing if perhaps we've already covered it. Sometimes people say to me, can I send them a link? I'm not very IT literate. I can eventually send a link, but by the time I've scrolled through all the videos, you could have scrolled through all the videos, so it's worth having a little look. It's an interesting one. The most common question I still get asked on videos is what size is the layout, and without fail, religiously on every video I make on a layout, I mention the size. Quite often at the beginning with a yard rule. So this one, for instance, is 3 feet by 22 inches, or in new money, 99 centimetres by 55, 56 centimetres. Now, it obviously means that a lot of people look at the thumbnail or watch the very first few minutes of the video, like it, but don't watch the whole video, which I always find quite amusing when people ask me questions which I know I've answered in the video. But hey ho. I do have my little list this week, so I've got all professional this week. I've got a little list of what we're going to talk about. I am just going to leave the train running while I talk about some of this stuff. I'm not sure of another way of doing it, to be honest. I am at some point going to sit down and try and teach myself some editing, which Doug used to do. When Doug was younger and he wasn't as heavily involved in education, he used to really enjoy sitting and doing all the very professional editing. But a couple of years ago, when he got very busy, it's more than a couple of years ago now, with college, I took the decision, he wasn't able to do it, and I took the decision to do these simpler videos rather than nothing at all. And occasionally I get people say to me, oh, where's the great headers, where's the great editing? I am what I am. I'm not a great technical person. I'm an analogue, practical person. I'm not so good with the IT. But I might at some point sit and have a look at some of the editing software to see if we can do things. It's one of the reasons the other evening I sat and had 3 attempts at doing a shunting video, but I've got to do it as a one. And of course, as I've said before, the minute you press record, everything starts derailing, everything starts uncoupling. Doesn't matter how well you've tested it. And after 20 minutes and 4 attempts, I gave up. I will at some point try and do a shunting video, because I've been asked about these, which is how do you do shunting with shunting cards. I mean, frankly, people, it's really simple. You have a photo of the card, you shuffle them, you put the wagons in order. It's just a way of giving you something to do with your wagons. But I will try and do a video on it. So there's a few things caught my eyes in the model railway world. Few people very kindly put me on to things. So I think it's Railways for You or Model Railways for You. Somebody will correct me. They did a little post on social media, and they're doing a really good idea. When they go to their shows, they're selling a box as a starter kit for model railways. And they're going to put a Hornby 040 in, that kind of thing, one of the older ones, and a coach, and a wagon, this sort of thing, one of each, and a circle of track, and a cheap Hornby controller, and they're going to do it for 50 quid. Now, it's all second-hand stuff, but then I'm a big fan of second-hand stuff. And actually, 50 quid is a pretty good way of doing it when there's people out there trying to get 30 or 40 quid for an 040. Now, I wouldn't pay that, but people do all day long, apparently. The new price is subsidised. Hornby will do it for about 70 or 80. But that again makes you wonder if they can do it for 70 or 80, and the component parts are sometimes well up into the 150, 160 pound mark. Interesting. I hope the company doing the boxes don't put second and third radius track in, which is what Hornby do on their starter sets. I just can't get my head around that. I know it's to allow people to get a bigger layout. You start with an 040 and you'll then want to run bigger locos and first radius won't work. But as a way of showing people what can be done, first radius is so much better. I've already had this rant about the TT starter set, which I think is a really good set. Notwithstanding the fact that Hornby don't want to send me one to review. There you go. But it's going to have second radius track in it. Why do that? The advantage of TT is it's small. Put first radius in. You're putting an 040 in the set, but you're putting second radius track in. I've said before, it's an interesting thing that the newer companies, the tech companies, send Doug stuff worth thousands of pounds or hundreds of pounds to review. But I can't get, a 40 or 50 set off one of the suppliers, pound set, to review. Given how little people use traditional media and use modern social media, I think it's interesting that a great many of the model railway companies haven't caught up with that. Not forgetting, of course, Metcalfe, who have sent me stuff to review and are clearly a little bit more up to speed on the way that marketing works. Try to remember that young people, and that's the future of the hobby, don't read magazines and don't watch television. They use social media. So the only way you're going to grow any hobby, let alone a hobby like Metal Railways that's horribly stuck with the over 60-year-olds, and I say that as a 61-year-old, is to use social media. It's just a thought. They do use it occasionally. I am surprised in one case that somebody that Hornby use has a lot less subscribers than we do. But I think in this world it's probably who you know rather than what you know. I know a couple of channels that are very heavily supported, where basically they're in the know. They're in the mix. They're part of that world. Not complaining. I'm quite happy with what we do. One of the problems with being sent stuff is you generally feel obliged to be a little bit generous. And at least this way I get to be a bit more honest. And then the other railway news somebody showed me, I was quite interested in this. One of the manufacturers running a forum, which is really nice, really good idea. It's full of ideas and tips, but you have to pay to belong to it. 20 quid for the basic and 60 quid for the premium. And I just thought that was an interesting idea. It's a marketing tool, so that's where you're getting your money back because it's a marketing tool, but you're going to charge people to do it. People are apparently happily paying it. It's an interesting one with so many forums and YouTube channels out there. I personally wouldn't pay to go onto a Metal Railway forum, but there we go. Obviously some people are. And while we're talking tech, interesting with eBay, I find myself now that I can't sell anything on eBay and I can't get my money out of eBay because I've sold more than 30 items in a year. So HMRC have told eBay that they must have my national insurance number to make sure that I'm not a trader. I find this quite interesting. So very large companies, and I'm not going to mention them on here because I don't want to be sued, avoid tax wholesale, hundreds of millions of pounds by registering themselves. But HMRC is worried that you or I might be selling a few things out of our garage and shed that we've had, model railways, and might be making some money. I've crossed the threshold, so there's nothing I can do. I've got to submit my national insurance number and presumably get a bill from HMRC at some point because I've sold more than 30 items. It's an interesting one. They're saying that if an individual item is less than 6,000, you won't, but it doesn't say 6,000 as a level. I've sold apparently more than £1,000 worth in a year. Not surprising, I've sold 3 layouts. So I'm obviously going to end up paying some tax on it. I just find it interesting. But it does mean that I can't sell anything else on eBay because it'll only increase my tax bill. So I just find it very interesting. It's a shame. I was intending to sell the last of my 00 locos so that I could fund my Engage. HMRC say if you're simply selling stuff that's in your garage, you may not have to pay. Always reminds me of years ago when the army used to do a declaration at the end of the exercise. I have no live rounds, empty cases or misfires, pyrotechnics, blank firing or parts thereof in my possession, or various versions of that before anybody takes me to task. It changed about 4 times in the 20 years I did it. And the answer was that if you subsequently find that you had got those things, action may not be taken, which was supposed to reassure people, but it didn't tell them they weren't going to be done. I feel a bit like that about HMRC. I will say that on one occasion I did inadvertently hang on to things that I shouldn't have done, and when I handed them in, no action was taken, but I was quite a senior officer at the time and had therefore been a bit of a muppet, and I think the payment was everybody got to take the piss. So we'll see what happens with eBay. So great fun the other week at Something. I went over and we all had to go clearing. We've got a big storage shed there, and one of the guys, Chris, did an amazing thing. He made these 3D cardboard scale model of the shed and worked out that we could store the layouts in a much more efficient way. And myself and Richard and Leo had a good look at it and decided if we threw away a van full of stuff, we'd have a lot more room as well. So we threw away a van load of stuff, much to the chagrin of some of the members. And it did make me think about my own shed. I will pan a little bit. Those of you of a nervous disposition, look away. I have a messy shed. I like working in a mess. I'll come to that in a minute. But I do know a lot of it could just be thrown. And looking at, I did throw a lot when I cleared the shed, but looking at what we did at Something made me realise that I just need to be a bit more ruthless and clear some space. Ultimately, it's a simple thing. You can't keep making layouts. And this is what I was saying to a couple of the guys at Something, that guys, we might feel that sentimentally, emotionally, we want to keep these layouts, but we can't keep making layouts and not get rid of layouts. At some point, we've either got to stop making layouts or we've got to get rid of some layouts. I've got a couple of layouts I'm going to sell. I've got my Japanese one and I've got another little N-gauge oval one, this one. I'm on a tripod, so bear with me. That one. That's a really nice one. It's a 12-inch diameter Kato track, mounted points, the whole works. Now, obviously it's going to be very tricky with no eBay now. But there are a couple of layouts there. Look back through if you're interested. The Japanese one and that one, they are up for sale if anybody's interested. But back to my point. If you're like me, you enjoy making layouts and you do N-gauge, which enables you to make more layouts, at some point I've either got to stop making layouts or I've got to sell them. I've got to the point really now that I can't see me making many more. I've got my 00 shunting layout tucked under there that I like. I've got my big layout behind me, and again, it's a mess. It's being used as a storage area at the moment. That's going to take a year, minimum of a year. So I've got a big project. The American one at the moment's really got my interest, and I can work on that. And that kind of, oh, look at that, it's got drunk. I guess that brings me to the layout. So, I've always wanted an American layout. That's all right. Just made a note of something else I wanted to talk about. I've always wanted an American layout. I've always been quite taken with their diesels and their freight cars. I love the American short line concept. A kind of commercial business, looking for businesses to run rail lines to, the way they join up and businesses and railways get together and they're privately run. We don't have anything like it in the UK. And so this really got me, and I've been quietly collecting for a couple of years. And it's one of those things where I was able to build the board out of what was left over from our big house build. And this is timber left over from the build and left over from the kitchen. So this didn't actually cost me anything. Well, I say it didn't cost me anything. The kitchen cost me rather a lot of money. So it depends which way you look at it. But these bits were genuinely in a skip. You can argue whether they were free or not, given that I paid for the kitchen. But technically, I didn't have to pay any extra, put it that way. The buildings and things, oh, it's raining hard. It's happened the other day. I got trapped down the shed. Terrible thing to happen to a man. I nipped down here just to get something. It hammered down for half an hour. I couldn't get back up to the house, so I had to do trains for half an hour. What do you do? As I explained to my wife. I did consider asking her to bring me a cup of tea down, but I thought that was probably pushing it a bit far in the pissing rain. I really must get a kettle down here. So I already had a few things. The water tower there I got for a couple of quid from a show. This rather fabulous, it is a station building, but it's what the Americans call a depot. £4 that was from a show at Worthing last year. Couple of quid. I've got a signal box. That's one of the oldest buildings I've got. That's been sort of on quite a few layouts, but it really lives on an American layout, doesn't it? You know, these big grain silos. The proper word for them has just escaped me. I'm sure somebody will correct me. So that's on there. These were an interesting little buy. These were on eBay. I guess they're a Chinese product. 12 quid each, but they're fantastically detailed and painted up. They've come up really nice. Well, a Gauge Master Kestrel kit is a tenner, so that's not too bad, and they're really American. I've got this funny little church that I've had kicking around. I'm going to weatherboard it. I managed to get a barn from Eastbourne Models and it's called Mostly Trains now. I was going to give it its old name. That was 4 quid. So it's not cost me a lot of money. The track was very second hand. That loco, the RS3, is one of the oldest locos I own. I bought that when we first did model railways. I was going to do N and I couldn't make N work for all sorts of reasons. I've done the story of that, but basically I dropped it a couple of years ago. I've managed to get it put together and running properly. I wanted to repaint it and suddenly realised black was the best colour to get a nice finish. That gave me the black and red. I then got a GP18 recently, which was also black. And so I've painted the cab red. And I've now got my own short line. So this is going to be the Ringwood and Albion short line. The idea is this is a interchange road, bigger railway, like I've got my Burlington Northern there. We'll drop wagons off and then the short line will run them round. Now, I know the problems with ovals. In theory, they're unrealistic because, you know, they don't go anywhere. But for me, this is, and I've done a video on it, this is the best model railway setup. I can shunt in here and I can shunt in there. I can store wagons over the back in the third siding over the back there. I can watch trains go round and I can shunt. And I can run, if I run a very short train over the back, I can hold 3 different locos. The station was originally going to be there. It's not very American. It's not very anything, actually, but it's a usual contrivance that we do on model railways. But actually putting it off into the corner there means the trains can run by it. So, not your usual American layout because it's small. I'm sure my American friends are having a giggle at it. I once got an American magazine in the UK. It basically says like small model railway layouts, which meant about 12 foot by 8 foot. The American definition of small is very different. I know not all you guys have got great big basements and attics, but obviously a lot of people have. But this does for me show why N-Gauge is so superb. This is a perfectly usable layout. If this was the only layout you had room for, 3 foot by 2 foot, let's call it, you still got everything you could want. There's enough building there to keep you busy. There's enough operational interest to make it a great layout. And you can just change your consists at the front here. You don't need a big fiddle yard. And this is what's wrong with 00. It's too big. I'm sorry, guys. At some point, I'm going to do a video which I know will annoy people. But the reality is 00 is too big. We've done 00 because that's what we had lying around from when we were kids or our parents. We've done 00 because that's what we do in Britain. We do 00. It's too big, guys. Don't believe me? That's a Class 31 in 00. Okay? So to do this same layout in 00, I need 6 foot by 3.5 feet. And it's not the 6 foot that's necessarily the problem, it's the 3.5 feet. Because you can't reach the back of it. Unless you've got arms like an orangutan. So that means you need a well in the middle. Which means you now need 5 feet. So all of a sudden you're up to the 6 by 4 feet. And yes, I know I've built smaller 00 layouts. But, you know, by the time you've got that and 2 coaches on it, it really isn't working well. So it's an interesting one. I still think N is the way to go. For me at the moment, the American N is fabulous. So if I stop this here a second, I'm just going to lift this off. So this is a Lifelike Models. There we go. What's the box for it? SD. Oh, it's GP38. I'm slowly learning my American locos. That's a GP38. It hadn't been tested, although looking at the person's profile and everything, they look quite sensible to me. It's a nice looking loco. These American locos tend to run. They're all-wheel drive, all-wheel pickup. Sure enough, when it arrived, it runs a little bit of oiling to get rid of the noise. And yes, I did use 3-in-1 oil before anybody asks. Don't get me started. Watch the video. And it's lovely. And what did that cost me? That cost me £19, including postage. So there are a few bargains out there on the American side. Interestingly, this one was a lot more. This was about 30. Was listed as a good runner, and when it arrived, it wouldn't run at all. Now, yeah, giving it a push and a shove, and you get it running, and you give it a run, and you give a lube, it turned out to be very good. But that's one of the problems with eBay. You know, how did somebody sell that and describe it as a good runner when it wouldn't run when it arrived? They probably put a battery over the wheels, 12-volt battery or something over the wheels, and the wheels turn and they call it a good runner. It's an interesting one. I'm always very honest with my stuff, but there you go. But anyway, that's a real bargain loco. I've got two more I've got a bargain loco on the way, which we'll talk about next time. And I've got a really important loco that I bought, which goes right back to my earliest memories of railways. And we'll talk about that next time. But there we go. You know, that's to me the advantage of these sort of layouts. Now, I will talk about ballasting a bit. I did ballast this. I ballasted this because I wanted to build a first radius track using British Pico, not Kato. And also because it gives me slightly shorter points. And because I had a lot of it kicking around, I bought a second-hand, somebody will get me wrong, I think it's ST300, the Pico starter set. And I wanted to adapt that and use it. So I wanted to use it. So I needed to ballast it. I quite enjoy ballasting. And I've done a lot of work on it. I painted all the rails. I dry brushed all the sleepers. I weathered and dry brushed all the ballast. Took a lot of time getting it right. And then spent evenings and evenings and evenings trying to get the bloody thing to run properly. Because you've got to clean all the track. You've got to clean all the points. Eventually I couldn't get this part to work. Obviously something to do with that point. Cleaned it, couldn't get it to work. I was doing my head in. I was getting a controller and testing other parts until it dawned on me that it was that point at the back that wasn't working. The power is off to the left, so it's powering that part of the layout, and I'd got the wrong point. Once I cleaned the point at the back thoroughly, the whole thing works. It is the problem with ballasting. And then last night, this point wouldn't close properly, and it had got lots of dry ballast in it. So I spent ages getting the dry ballast out, and it still wouldn't work. And why wouldn't it work? Because I glued the knob at the front on too close, and when you tried to move the bar, it wouldn't work. I'm glad I found that before I ripped all the points up. But if it hadn't been ballasted, I would never have doubted that it was that. I would have checked there first. So yeah, ballast looks great, but I'm not sorry that I've gone and used Kato on my big layout. That took me an hour to lay, and it runs superbly, and it will continue to run superbly. So I'm not sorry that my big one is Kato. And then another problem I had with this was I thought I'd got a power loss, which was very odd because the two wires over the back should power it, and they just kept slowing terribly round this side. Guess what that was? The workbench isn't as level as I thought it was. Now, it doesn't matter normally, particularly with 00, but a long freight train in N, this is enough to slow it up. It's not a big problem. I've wedged it at the back. It is slightly heavy because these wagons tend to bounce over this kind of track. So I've taken all the bodies off and filled them full of weight. which means they work really well over the points, but it does mean that you need a bit more power and the slightest lack of level, and they don't work. So there you go. And then I'll talk a little bit about this, and a lot of people probably won't like this. I'm quite an interesting character. I am a messy worker, as you can see. And I read some stuff the other day that was quite eye-opening. I'm a messy worker. I find it difficult to motivate myself to do things. And then I get highly motivated about other things. And there is a suggestion I might have. A friend of mine told me some years ago, we were discussing ADHD in children, because we used to get a lot of ADHD and neurodiversity in cadets. It became a major part of what we did in the end. And my friend, who was an expert on it, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You can get adult ADHD as well, you know, Mike." And he was talking about me. And some of the interesting traits of that is that some ADHD people work in a mess, because then I can see everything. I have short-term memory problems, always have had. I can walk through a house, no idea where I left my keys. It can take me ages to learn where lots of things are. If everything is out, believe it or not, I know where my tools are on that bench. I know where the paints are. More importantly, it's why when I suddenly get fired up by something like this American layout, I built an American layout and completely stopped what I'm doing with the other side until my interest gets taken again. And that's made me think back to quite a lot of things I've done in my life. And it's one of those things, it kind of makes a lot of sense. I'm not saying it's a problem in any way, shape or form, although it is probably for the people around me. It's just interesting to see that maybe that's why my head thinks the way it is. And maybe that's why I like railways so much, model railways. And then it's an interesting one. How many people I come across in the model railway world who you think to yourself, yeah, you're on the spectrum there somewhere, aren't you? And I mean that in a nice way. And I do wonder. I do think it's no different to the Army cadets when I realised at one point that all the most successful of the instructors were all a bit odd. We were all a bit mad in our own ways. Because it's not a very conventional environment, strangely enough as it sounds, given that it's the Army Cadet Force. We operated in quite challenging circumstances, and you needed to be a particular kind of individual to cope with it, let alone get to the level I did. So there you go, just a few thoughts on neurodiversity. Bet you didn't think we were going to talk about that today on a model railway thing, but I do think it's relevant to model railways. I do think it's why a lot of us probably enjoy our model railways. It's creative, it's about motivation, it's about chasing that high and being able to get that high out of little things. I made this the other day. There's a little freight house that I made, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed sitting and making it. I got lost in it, and I'll always enjoy looking at that. I'll always look at that and think, yeah, that's good, that. Same as this loco. And I've always had this crazy enthusiasm when people weren't being unkind about me, because I am a toe rag to work with sometimes. Even people that didn't get on with me very well used to say, but I wish I had your enthusiasm. I get terribly enthusiastic about things. I'm very demotivated about things I don't want to do. I find it very difficult to start projects I don't want to start. And sure, we all do, I get that. But I find it particularly difficult. But if I'm motivated in something, yeah, no problem. I can do it all the time. I don't know. There you go. So, model railways, lot spoken about today. I think it's one of the longest Train Shed Tuesdays. I expect, as my usual saying, I expect we've got 4 people and a dog still watching. But those of you that are still watching, I hope you've enjoyed it. There are more videos coming. I am going to try and do a shunting video. I'm going to do some more videos on the American layout. There's a lot of progress to do on that. I don't know how much time I'm going to get in the next few weeks. The builds that are kind of finishing off crucial stage. We're hoping then to get a little bit more time away. And then Doug's home for a couple of weeks over the holidays, home from his job placement. And obviously it'd be good to catch up with him. So I can't promise lots of videos in the next few weeks. I would just ask that if you enjoy what we do, please spread the word. Please, put us on your social media, give us shout outs. I think what we do is really important, especially in these difficult times now, wherever. So if you enjoy what we do, please spread the word. That would be great. And thank you, as always, for putting up with me waffling on for what is now half an hour. You're very brave people.